Call to order the special board meeting of the Oak Park and River Forest High School on Tuesday, September 11th at 6:40 p.m. and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Ms. Spivey?
Here.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Mr. Isley?
Here.
Ms. Cassell?
Here.
Mr. Arkin?
Here.
Dr. Moore?
Here. And I just wanted to make a note that on our agenda, you will see that we have put our public comments after our presentations, hoping for some richer comments given what we will learn this evening. So thank you all for allowing us to move forward. And before we get into the Imagine work, there is one item that we have, and I move to approve the Culture, Climate, and Behavior Committee membership and ask for a second.
Second.
Ms. Spivey?
Yes.
Mr. Barron?
Yes.
Mr. Isley?
Yes.
Ms. Cassell?
Yes.
Mr. Arkin?
Yes.
And Dr. Moore?
Yes, thank you. And now our next item is the presentation of first draft of Master Facilities Plan, and I will turn it over to Lynn Kaminista and Mike Poirier. And Poirier, sorry. No, you can.
Thank you. I just want to publicly recognize the Imagine Work Group, who have done a phenomenal job over the last year and some months. This is all coming to fruition because of their hard work and research. Thank you.
Hey, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Pruitt-Adams and Dr. Moore, and thank you to the board for the opportunity to present a draft of the Imagine Facilities Master Plan this evening. I'm speaking from notes because, as you all know, I have a tendency to ad-lib too much. Like that, wasn't even in the notes. Okay, I am Lynn Kaminista, along with Mike Poirier, who's back there behind one of those boards. Wave, Mike. We are the co-chairs of the Imagine OPRF team, and seated behind the boards and easels is the rest of the team, who will be happy to step out from behind the easels and answer your questions later. We're sorry that that was the only place we could figure out to put them, while you could also see the boards. We also have with us tonight consultants from Perkins & Will Architects, Rick Young, Mike Dalter, and Mark Jolliker, who will be available to answer questions, as well as consultants, our construction consultants from International Contractors, Inc., Terry Felden and Mark Poskin, who will also be available for questions. I wanted to start by bringing everybody up to speed on where we are in the process. I'm going to walk you through, Mike and I are going to walk you through the master plan diagrams, which the board members have all seen, and you've all seen the components that are on them before, so we'll do that as quickly as we can. We're going to have a short discussion of the costs and duration and timing of the various sequences. And then we will be answering board members' questions and gathering feedback from you, and hopefully we'll be able to have everybody participate in answering those questions. So a couple minutes on the Imagine process, reminding you sort of where we are in the process. The Imagine team, which was commissioned as volunteers to come up with a comprehensive facilities master plan for the building, first met 13 months ago in August of 2017. We spent our first 6 months conducting research on the facilities needs at OPRF. We toured the building multiple times in multiple ways. We toured peer schools, we did surveys of students, faculty, and staff. We did listening sessions and interviews with the same. We shared our needs assessment in February with the community and got feedback from them. Then we spent the next 6 months determining how the needs we'd identified could fit together into a facilities master plan. We did this with the professional guidance of our consulting architects, with feedback from the community at several more community sessions, and also with feedback from the board at our June session. Tonight we're presenting a draft of a single consolidated master plan. It's not, plan A or B, it's a single consolidated plan. We'll be gathering feedback from you all on the board tonight. On October 3rd, we're holding another community engagement session to get more feedback from the community, and then we will recommend a final plan to the board in November. So that's where we are in terms of the process. I want to spend a couple minutes highlighting a few themes that you'll hear running through our discussion tonight. First, Imagine has kept students and student learning at the center of everything that we've done. Our team members can happily tie almost every single element of this plan to student learning. Everything from all gender bathrooms, to daylighting in classrooms, to the creation of collaboration spaces. We really put student learning at the center, and we asked ourselves repeatedly whether each element supported student learning. Second, Imagine's emphasis on equity has resulted in a plan to create a building that welcomes, values, and affects all students in the building. This is not about one facility or one group of students. It's about the entire building and all of our students. Again, our team will be happy to share with you our plans, how our plans foster equity, from creating a truly welcoming welcome center, to making the building fully ADA accessible, to improving access to on-campus resources to help balance out some of the inequities of resources at home. And I'm talking about things like access to a printer, or access to sound production equipment, or access to a quiet place to study or do group work, things that some of our students have at home, but many do not. And we firmly believe that to the extent possible, we should provide those resources in the building. Third, Imagine's work has been thorough, detailed, and needs-driven. The master plan addresses critical needs without a lot of extras. Our initial list of identified needs was very, very long. There was a lot of work that we believe needed to be done on facilities in this building. But as we grappled with the constraints of the physical space and other district priorities and community concerns about funds, we've had to prioritize, and many of the identified needs did not make the cut. They are not in the final plan. And finally, fourth, Imagine has considered improved campus security at every stage of our work. We believe that this master plan will enhance security measures that are already in place, and again, the team members would be happy to share more detail about how it does that, as could our architects. Just a quick update about, I should have brought my water up here. What we've done since we last saw you in June. No, it's okay, don't bother. I'll grab my bottle later. So in June, we presented you two concepts, the orange concept and the blue concept. And as you remember, they had pretty much the same components arranged in slightly different order on the floor plans. We have now consolidated those into one, and I just want to give you a quick update of the things that were different between those two, how they are resolved in the plan that we're going to present tonight. First, the Library and Tutoring Center, which we're now calling the Student Resource Center. We decided to go ahead and put those above the South Cafeteria, as we had in one of those plans, although now it's a two-story structure above the South Cafeteria instead of one. We opted to put performing arts at the southwest corner of the building, closest to the stadium. We had been showing a bump out of the building between the main entrance south to the south entrance, or the driver's ed entrance. We showed the building bumping out to Scoville. We have pulled that back in, so we keep the same footprint of the current building along that portion of Scoville. We've located the pool on the first floor, not on the lower level, and we are showing small group offices rather than full departmental offices. And finally, before we go on to talk about the plan itself, at the June meeting, several board members asked questions about needs, like what are the needs you defined? How did you do that? So Mike and I turned to our sub-teams and asked them to go back and revisit that research that they did for the first 6 months and to summarize it for you. The resulting document is a draft document in your packet that is 56 pages long. We will have the final for you in November, and it will be longer than 56 pages because there are some things that we didn't quite fit in time. So we feel that we have documented needs, and we hope that you'll see that as we walk through. All right, the master plan, a draft master plan in 5 sequences. You guys want to start doing the boards while I do this little intro here. This is, again, a single master plan. It's broken into 5 construction stages or sequences, which is the language the architects use, so we have learned to use that language. It's designed to be implemented over a 6 to 10 year period. The sequencing assumes pauses between some of the sequences to give building occupants a little bit of a breather between construction projects and to line up funding and construction bids for future sequences. The sequence order is based on a number of things: physical urgency of facilities, Imagine prioritization, impact of the construction on students, benefits of the final product to students, and constructability, which is the term for what has to be built before something else. I always use the thumb puzzle analogy. Sometimes you have to move something out of the way to make room to move something in there. Sometimes you have to shore up one wall before you can take down something else. So those factors all play into how the sequences are done. I do want to highlight that all components are important. Please don't assume that because something is in sequence 5 that Imagine considers it less important than something that's in sequence 2. That is not the case. So Mike and I are going to step you through each of the sequences, each of the floor plans. We'll give you costs after each of them as we discuss them. I do want to note, a master plan is a living document. This is going to change over time. We hope it doesn't because we love it so much. That's not really true. But this is intended to be a living document that changes as the school's needs change over 6 to 10 years. So for sequence 1 through 3, we are presenting capital construction plan with scope, construction timelines, and construction cost estimates. For sequences 4 and 5, we are presenting the scope and the construction timeline only without construction costs. Those sequences are likely to be implemented after year 5, and both the costs and the plan elements are likely to have changed somewhat by then because it's going to be a living plan. So letting you know that up front. Okay, so sequence 1, I'm going to try the handheld mic thing. Never something I like very well. Okay, so the way this is going to work is I'm going to be pointing at stuff on this board for that board, and we'll be projecting those same things up on here as we go. Yes, question? Yeah, okay. So the audience can see them. I know it's teeny tiny. If you have internet in here, you can also look at these on your phone, but you're going to have to look at the hard copies later. Okay, so sequence 1 has 3 main components to it. Oops, I guess I have to stand over here so the board can see it. Sorry to turn my back to you. There's 3 main components. The first one, if you start here on level 2, is, as I mentioned earlier, relocating the library and the tutoring center in a new construction that is above the south cafeteria. This is 2 new stories. The main point of this is it moves these key resources that students need to the center of the building where students can access them more easily during the day as well as outside of school hours. And then this cluster of the library and tutoring center forms the anchor for that commons concept that we've talked about before that's going to come in later sequences. So that's the first major component. The second major thing that happens in sequence 1 is we have the creation or renovation of 76 classrooms in the building. So moving the library and tutoring center from this northwest corner of the building frees up spaces to put classrooms with access to daylighting along that perimeter on the 3rd floor and on the 2nd floor. It also allows us to include some new visual art spaces, some relocated, some newly created there. Just a little note, you'll look on here, whenever you see solid colors, that is something that's either new construction or really renovated, like down to the studs kind of renovation. Anything that's in a speckled color is something that's getting a lighter renovation. Okay? And then once we get to later stages, those will turn gray, showing that they have already been either constructed or lightly renovated. Okay, so that's it. The classrooms are the second major component. The third major component in sequence 2 is the complete redesign and renovation of the special ed spaces on the 1st floor. Excuse me. 2 elements to this. One is locating offices and conference rooms, meeting spaces close to the front door. Special ed has a lot of visitors to the building, families and outside professionals who come in for IEP meetings about students and their education. And so those facilities need to be located in a place that's easy to access from the outside. And Mike will talk about some security considerations there later. We also, if you go a little further north, also, something that for me was not something that frankly was on my radar coming into this, and which I now see as one of the most critical needs in the entire building, is completely renovated and redesigned spaces for the TEAM program, which is, as you know, the program for our students with the most profound special needs. I am a firm believer that the current spaces do not adequately serve them, and we need spaces that actually serve their learning needs and also preserve their dignity, because the current spaces and the closest location of an accessible bathroom does not currently do that. So I feel very strongly about that one, as I think the rest of our team does. Okay, back to the thing. The duration. The library and tutoring center portion of this is a 14-month project. So that will be a summer, an academic year, and the following summer. So it's 1 academic year that those spaces, largely the south cafeteria, will be out of commission. The rest of the renovations in this part can all be done over either that first summer or the second summer. Okay, so there will not be disruption to students in this northern part of the building during those construction phases. All right, cost estimates for the work. All of sequence 1 could be completed for $28,507,600. So that's the cost for all of the work in sequence 1. Okay, sequence 2. I'm not doing so well with the notes and the mic here, but I'm working on it. Okay, sequence 2 is very different. It is largely improvements for physical education spaces. Basically what it does is it takes the 90-year-old building and some infill buildings that are all east of the field house on the south end of the building, and it completely replaces that part of the building with a new 4-story addition that would meet many of the physical education needs. Starting on the lowest level, the lower level, oops, that's down here. Let me get documents so we go the other way. We start with the biggest component down there are new changing facilities. This would include boys' locker rooms, girl lockers rooms, all gender locker rooms, and increased privacy for all students down on that in those new locker rooms. There's also some minor additions here for performing arts in this phase, even though it's mostly a physical education. There's some additional storage and a new dressing room and ventilation for the green room. In the scope of the project, it's not a big deal. For the 100+ kids who rehearse musicals in that space every day, new ventilation systems are a really big deal. So it gets kind of buried in this part, but that is something that's worth thinking about. Going up to the first floor, we have athletics and PE offices in one corner. That label's a little bit misleading. It will contain those things, but it will also contain other facilities like conference rooms, the new trainer's room that will be adequately sized and more accessible than the current one is, locker rooms for coaches, the laundry facilities that are currently in the basement, and several other things that are all in that giant block. There's a multi-purpose classroom, concessions. The pool is located in the southeast corner of the building. It's a 25 by 40 yard pool. And it includes also all the spaces the state mandates that it have separate locker rooms and storage, and pool mechanicals were in the basement. What else? There's a new elevator here, this little thing with the X in it, this little box with the X is a new elevator that serves all 5 levels of this 4-story building. Currently there is no elevator in the south end of the building, which means that parts of it are accessible only by stairs for students, faculty, staff, visitors to the building. That also means that in the event that there were an emergency case where paramedics needed to be in there, they also do not have an elevator that they could use for that end of the building. So there is an elevator that is added in the south end of the building, along with some new toilets on every level. Going up to the second floor, we have a new multi-purpose dance gym. With the appropriate floor. We all heard, as did you, a lot from dancers, drill, and cheer in the fall about the need to have adequate and appropriately floored and mirrored space for their sports, as well as for phys ed dance, which is a unit that all students have to do. Also over on this side, you'll see open below to the pool and some spectator seating for the pool. Okay, let's see what else. Going up to the third floor, we have a weight room because we lost that on the first floor when we tore down the existing building. A weight room, another concession stand, and a 3-court competition gymnasium. This will be appropriate for varsity athletics, boys and girls basketball, boys and girls volleyball, possibly wrestling, although it's a long way to haul the mats, but we'll fix that later. And then you can push these bleachers back for a 3-court phys ed or practice space. Let's see, if you go up to the 4th floor, this is open to below for that competition gym, mechanical room, and a storage room, and a little look ahead. All of these spaces on the 3rd floor are also designed so that they can then be repurposed when we get to sequence 5, which is going to be down the road a bit, but you'll see, it'll be Mike's big reveal, is how those things all fit together. All of this is topped with a green roof, which is not shown because it'd be 2 more feet of board in order to do that. The duration for this sequence, for the entire sequence, is 18 months. So this is the longest one, I believe, in the whole process. That's for demolition and construction. It'd be 2 summers and the full academic year in between, and then either the spring before or the fall after, or part of the spring and part of the fall. again, we've told you this before, other schools do this all the time. We would figure it out. We would figure out what makes the most sense in terms of delivering the most of our curriculum to students that we can in that time in the way that puts the least pressure on the building, and also hopefully the way that is most cost effective for our construction. Which brings us to cost. The cost of sequence 2 is $66,742,100. One note on the order of sequences 1 and 2. Sequence 1 really has to happen early on in order to make room in the building for other stuff. It's adding space that eventually becomes classroom space that frees up other spaces. That said, sequence 1 and sequence 2 could be done simultaneously, and we'll show you some duration diagrams later that explain how that might happen. Sequence 3, however, has to follow sequence 2. If you tried to do 3 first, you would lose too much programming space for physical education during construction. And I can explain the details of that, or you could just trust me on why sequence 3 really has to come after sequence 2. Okay, sequence 3, and then I'm done, and then it'll be Mike's turn. Sequence 3 goes to the other side of the field house. We keep the field house during both of these sequences, the existing field house. This goes to the other side and replaces the 90-year-old building on the west side of the field house, on the south end, with a new 4-story performing arts and physical education facility. It does expand the footprint a little bit out into the current, it's not actually into the mall, it's into the sort of space at the edge of the mall. So you could still drive on the mall, but it takes out some of those. There's a little bit of green space and some built-up gardens there that we would lose in this process in order to get the depth that we need for the performing arts spaces. Starting at the lower level, we have a new, larger, multi-purpose wrestling room. We also have a new team changing and equipment facility for athletic teams, including perhaps visiting teams. On floors 1 and 2, in this bright pink, you see performing arts spaces. This is 2-story choir, orchestra, and band room, along with a 2-story black box theater and a 2-story stagecraft space. There's also a dressing room on the first floor, control room upstairs, and there are practice and ensemble rooms. There are all these little smaller spaces and some offices and storage facilities there as well. What else? Sorry, lost the place here. Third floor. If we look at the third floor, we have the construction of a multi-purpose gymnastics gym, as well as an adaptive cardio gym, because that was in the part of the building that we've just torn down here. And once again, it's topped by a green roof. And the gymnastics gym also has a climbing wall and that in there as well. In the center of the building, if we can go back down to floor 1, in the center of the building, in sequence 3, we also do the commons on the first and second floors. This is a renovation of the existing student commons into a more welcoming, functional space that should serve as a hub for student activities. You'll see later, in later sequences, how we start to pull in all sorts of student-centered activities along that commons now that we have created it. Also, I just want to highlight 2 other things at the north end of the building that happen on every floor here. One is there are actually 2 elevators added, one off the commons and one in the sort of center of the academic wing of the building. And near that, on every floor, are new toilet facilities for bathroom facilities. See, I picked up those architect things. Bathroom facilities for all gender bathrooms for transgender and non-conforming students. Both of those, both the elevator and the all-gender bathrooms, will greatly reduce missed instructional time for the students who use those facilities, who currently either have to wait for the slow elevator or have to cross the building to find an appropriate bathroom. So those are added on all 4 floors in both of these. Let's see what else. The duration, the elevators and bathrooms are summer work. The commons is a 6-month project. And the Southwest edition is 15 months. Again, you do summer, academic year, and summer. The cost for sequence 3 is $49,629,100. And that's it for me. I'm going to hand it off to Mike, who's going to talk about phases 4 and 5. Or sequences.
Thank you.
Everybody still back there?
kind of become the imaginary team. Sorry. Limitations of the logistics. Okay, sequence 4 follows logically right behind all the things that were done in sequence 3. Some of the highlights on the first and second floor: it relocates building administration, building and district administration to, the former performing arts area. Performing arts moves out to the west side of the field house, and this becomes the new building. So it'll be the superintendent's office, the boardroom, and other building and district administration that see a high frequency of public traffic. The idea here again is to get near the main entrance for a control and safety and security standpoint, as much of the high public traffic functions as we can. It does convert, as you can see here, a little tough to see, it's a small square. It converts the current unwelcoming center to a welcoming center. Okay, editorial comment. It importantly relocates student services to the core of the building. So that's the last major piece of business that moves to create the commons area. There is a little bit more work, but that's the last major piece of business. And then finally, and not unimportantly, it creates or renovates 25 classrooms and 14 science labs. It's a heavy emphasis in this phase on science and math, and it's not that, again, like Lynn said earlier, it's not that science and math are unimportant, but the right way to try to neighborhood science and math include putting science labs into the area on the second floor, for example, that are currently occupied by the superintendent's office and the boardroom. Okay, that's it for sequence 4. The final sequence completes the renovation of 32 remaining classrooms along with faculty offices, completes the renovations, or the third floor renovations of the commons area, relocates on the south end of the building, the last bit of physical education business. It relocates the 3-court competitive gym to the floor of the existing field house, from where it had been established originally in sequence 2. This is open to below, and then spanning above that on the 3rd and 4th floor, a 200-meter 6-lane indoor track. So that's pretty much the total story. Sorry, I forgot to talk duration. On sequence 4, the duration is basically 3 to 4 months. So almost all of this work is going to be summertime work. This is another 15-month duration piece of business, driven obviously entirely by the work that needs to happen on the south end with the 3-court gym and the indoor track.
Mike, fax and LPED.
I'm sorry?
Fax and special.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Fax gets relocated, sorry, thank you, down here in this phase, or in this sequence. And what else did I miss?
Special ed moves from the 4th floor down to the 3rd.
Oh, yeah. In this sequence, special ed moves from the 4th floor down to the 3rd. Sorry, I was just trying to hit the highlights there. Okay. I guess we...
Duration? Did you want to break this?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to talk? Yeah, let's talk that now. Thanks. Can everybody on the board at least see that adequately? Do we have an electronic version of this to put on? What we've illustrated here are just 3 possibilities, and there are many more than 3, of course. So this is just to be illustrative. 3 possibilities for how this could play out from a time frame standpoint. About the most aggressive, first of all, let me orient you to this. In each one of the sequences, this hashed kind of gray shaded area is design and engineering, followed by this lightly shaded area, which is a bidding time. Complete your engineering, go out for construction bids, and then the solid colored areas by phase are the construction phases. Okay, so that's when stuff's actually happening in the school. The most aggressive possible approach, as Lynn mentioned, and not that we're recommending this is a decision that really the administration and the board needs to make in terms of, one, how much disruption do you want in the school at one time? And two, how can we best go about funding all of this? But from a purely from construction standpoint, these two first sequences can go on simultaneously. And then 3, 4, and 5 could follow, so that it would be about a 5.5-year plan from the very start to finish. What we're calling a moderate plan, which is fundamentally head to toe kind of on each one of the sequences, get through or nominally through with one before you start the other. As you can see, runs out into year 8, a 7.5-year proposal. And then a very conservative approach, which pulls some gaps, in fact, between some of the activities, would run out in, like we've talked before, a 9.5-year kind of proposition. There's, those are just some trade-offs to be made. There's no right or wrong answers on any of this. The longer, of course, you're well aware, the longer it takes, to some degree, the more it costs because of escalation and stuff like that. But there's a number of important factors to consider before launching into this. Are we ready for questions?
I think so. I'm going to try to move you a little bit just to open it up so the TV is visible.
Oh, yeah.
We can start. Questions from the board?
Questions, comments, suggestions, whatever.
I had a question that just has to deal with in the aggressive time frame with doing the sequence 1 and sequence 2 at the same time. Is there, I know we've talked about this before, and I'm just thinking to, tear down once here and there, ripping stuff out. Is there a cost savings in doing it this way?
Modest, I would say. Terry? Mark?
Modest, yes.
Mark Poskin from ISCI.
Hi, good evening. I'm Mark Poskin. I'm with International Contractors. I'm our chief estimator. Definitely, yeah, there's savings. So in this exercise, we've included about 4% per year of cost escalation for sequences 1 through 3. So you can use that as a guideline when you're planning year by year. So for each year you extend out, it's about a 4% labor material increase based on national indices that we've used from RSMeans and EMI. So.
And that does include, that would include the demolition piece as well?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Do you want to talk about what the costs include?
Sure. Yeah. So I was asked to kind of summarize these cost estimates. They're very large dollar amounts, and you're probably wondering what's included in that.
Just a little.
So construction costs can be divided into 2 components, really. The numbers that you have in front of you reflect what we call total project costs. So they include both construction and indirect or soft costs for a total project. So they're inclusive of everything that we could assign. So in construction cost, you have direct labor and material. You have a payment and performance bond, which is required by law. You have cost escalation at 4% per year. You have contingencies for design and construction, which total in this case about 12%. We've included general conditions, which is field and engineering staff to manage the work. Reimbursable expenses for job office, first aid, webcam, safety, contractor profit, and then insurance. So those 8 items make up construction costs. And then in addition to that, there are other items such as builder's risk insurance, architectural engineering fees, material testing, geotechnical and environmental assessments, site survey, third-party commissioning, called inspection fees, moving, utility and municipality fees, furniture, equipment, technology, and audiovisual systems. Those 10 items make up soft costs. So when you add them both, you get a total project.
Any other questions right now?
I thought someone did it.
I think the other consideration, and we don't have a definitive answer to this, but the other consideration for running 1 and 2 simultaneously is they're both going to want some temporary space in the school to keep conducting their programs. And so there could be some competing considerations there that we haven't gotten to that level of detail of planning, obviously. But when you knock down that whole part of the phys ed program east of the current field house, in order for phys ed to continue to conduct its business and its curriculum, it's going to be looking for some temporary spaces elsewhere in the school. I don't know if Lynn reinforced enough. I didn't hear her.
I was going to contradict that last point.
Throughout this, at least until the end of sequence 5, the existing field house remains completely intact. And that's not really done with apologies to the historical folks. It's not done for that purpose. It's done for 2 principal purposes. One, it allows this sequencing to go on in a reasonable and manageable fashion. I mean, remember when we talked in June, we had the notion of, it was kind of like A and B, and both of them were tear down the whole south end and then come back and rebuild it. It was kind of like, yikes. I mean, we were all yikes. How do you do that? So this allows that to be done in a sequenced and a much more manageable fashion, so that among other things, the field house can be used for physical education classes in the interim in ways that it's not used today. When we do phase 5, some of the structure of the field house, at the very least, all the roof trusses in there, the roof support structure has to be removed in order to accommodate getting that new indoor track in. But it's unclear to us at this point whether any more work needs to be done on the field house in order to accommodate that or not. The field house floor and the existing field house walls may remain intact basically throughout this entire process.
Other questions? I talked too much already.
Hi, so thank you, first of all, this is pretty amazing. Oh, sorry. Get situated here. Thank you for your time and energy to all of you on the work group. So one of the things I'm concerned about is that we're going to get partway through this, and 10 years is 5 different boards, essentially. And it's hard to predict what the public will be in, 2026 or whatever it might be. Are each one of these sequences discrete? Meaning, if we get to 3 and there's no appetite to proceed, can they be sort of standalone like that, or is?
I would answer that the building is reasonably whole after each of the sequences. They're designed to be able to have pauses and have the school function in between. That said, I speak for the entire Imagine team when I say that we are strongly recommending doing all 5 of these phases. If we were to stop after any one of them permanently, there are many, many important needs that would be unmet.
Yeah, just one example on that. If, for example, things didn't proceed beyond this, one investment that would have to be made is to, where are we? First floor, thank you. In the existing field house, real unaccustomed to this. In the existing field house, we would have to bump out the field house into the alleyway between the buildings and the parking garage, because the field house does not currently accommodate a reasonable, or certainly not a standard, 160-meter track. The 160-meter track that's in there is crammed in there by squaring off the corners. I mean, if you want to get the majority, if you want to get the longest run, obviously you run everybody right into the corners all the way around the building. Well, the way this one's laid out currently today, there's a long straight, it turns a corner, it hits a straight, turns another corner. Real indoor tracks are laid out with semicircles on the end and two straights between them. And this won't accommodate that. So if this was going to go dormant for an extended period of time, and there wasn't confidence that the sequence 5 track could be built, the appropriate thing to do would be to invest
It's on their packet.
$4 million. Thank you. To bump this building out so that it would accommodate a standard, appropriate 160-meter track, which would still be limited to 4 lanes.
Yes, thank you to the entire team, and especially Lynn and Mike for all of your hard work. 2 questions about the field house. So in previous iterations of looking at master's facilities plans, there's been some conversation that, you know, the field house is structurally sound. From what you just said, it sounds as though that is compatible with what your recommendation is. And my second question, will there be any necessary zoning issues with some of the bump outs and?
The field house, while it may be structurally sound, is not fully functional for our school. It takes up a very large footprint that basically only has 1 floor of programming in it. We need to have more floors of programming considering our limited footprint. So it's structurally sound to get us through the construction, but it's not going to be structurally sound forever, and it's not a good use of space. So that's why we recommend. I mean, Mike's generous when he says the walls and floor would stay. It's basically coming out, and they'll preserve whatever they can preserve of it for economic reasons. But the top will be coming off of it, and it will be a brand new space that runs the opposite direction. I'm sorry, the second question was about
Zoning.
Zoning. Do you want to take this? Sure. Mike Dalter from P&W.
Michael Dalter, Perkins and Will. We've initiated our conversations with the village to try to get some ideas on what that might be, and we're planning on meeting with them either at the next meeting of the design review committee, which may be either next week or 2 weeks after that. So we'll know more information from them once we have that discussion with them.
So thank you all for all of your effort for the last 13 months. It's amazing, and the 56 pages will be longer, I'm sure, but there's a lot of need here. One thing we don't have at this point is the itemization for each of the stages of where these dollar figures came from. And so I'm wondering when that's going to happen. 29, 67, and then 40.
It was in your. It's in your packet.
Thank you very much.
Or is that a different?
That
Is
was
that a
off-
different document? Okay.
Well,
I mean,
I didn't see this part.
there's a part which breaks it down into like masonry and glass and
Yeah,
and plumbing.
It's by sequence, by phase, by
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, this eluded me, there's so many attachments, so.
I know there were 12 attachments. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You know.
okay, and then, let's see, also for sequences 4 and 5, I know that there's no estimate at this point, but I wonder, what is the bare minimum? Is there some ballpark that you can provide that we can hear at some point sooner than later on that? So there's a bigger picture of the overall.
Well, there isn't. The difficulty is, oh, sorry. Almost untrainable. The difficulty is the scope, and in particular for 5, as I mentioned, it is a lot less defined than it is for 1 through 3. And so it's difficult to, for example, how much surgery is going to have to be done to the field house in 5, in order to get that new 200-meter track to span across that existing space. We just haven't had the time or the kind of resources to look into that thoroughly enough, as we have with the stuff in 1 through 3.
I know it's a precarious thing because it's so far off. I just, to the extent that we can get some kind of estimate of a minimum, understanding that that means it could well be much more, that would just help us give a sense for us overall to know what this holistically would be. That's all I'll say. And I realize that I won't get a number tonight, but I just want to put that out there.
Okay. Fred?
Yes, I also want to say thank you to the entire Imagine group. It's really been, I mean, what a daunting task, and the amount of work that you guys put in. I mean, you should be all commended for it, and thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. One kind of specific that came up just looking at the diagrams. It had to do with the adaptive gym, which is, I can't remember where it was.
Oh, it's in sequence 3.
Is it in sequence 3? Okay, yeah. And it's on the, what, far, what is
It's
that?
right up, it's basically where it is now. It's on the
Yep.
3rd floor,
That's a flag.
Right.
right up in the corner.
My concern is that if the locker rooms, changing areas are on the far southeast side, and it is on the far west side, that especially for special needs students, which utilize that space, that could be problematic.
Okay. Oh,
Got it, thank you.
wait, do you want to talk about that or no?
One of the
Yeah, there's some locker rooms.
Yeah, one of the things that happens in sequence 5 here is there's actually some changing facilities that are associated with the field house as well.
Right.
Those are right on that same level as that adaptive gym.
Right, but if we don't get to sequence 5,
Right.
it's a problem.
It certainly would be something that we'd want to take a look at if there's some facilities that we could provide close to that area for that use. Yeah,
Right.
It's a very good point.
Got it.
It
Capture.
is,
Mike,
it is,
capture.
it is one of the dilemmas that you face when you keep the field house in play as long as possible
Right.
for the sequencing purposes.
All right. So my other question is kind of more of a general question, and it has to do with going back to your establishing needs and prioritization. And could you speak a little bit to how you, through needs analysis, how you came to priorities? I mean, there were certain things like ADA compliance, safety and security, those kind of things, and how that works into the prioritization of your sequencing.
Anybody from the team want to speak about parts of that? No?
Well, I'll take a stab at the
This may be a multi-part answer, it's a multi-part effort.
I'll take a stab at least at how we thought about prioritizing the list of needs overall. I can't really speak to the order of the sequencing because that's something that P&W was a little bit more involved with than we were. But in terms of the analysis that we did and kind of what we looked at, and I'm speaking largely on behalf of the athletics, PE, and extracurriculars team. That's the one I was involved with. But I think all of us kind of had the same things in mind. Safety, first and foremost, was a really big area of concern. So any of the spaces where we felt either the students were at risk, the teachers, the staff, the community was at risk because of things being in disrepair, because of poor ventilation, things like that, those items definitely rose to the top, number one. I would say the ADA accessible, which is an issue kind of throughout the building, and that speaks to some of the equity points that Lynn mentioned earlier, was high on the list as well. I do think that we paid quite a bit of attention and also prioritized sort of wants and needs from the students. I would say maybe that was a third kind of in the list, but safety, ADA, and then just sort of general demand and kind of needs. There were, in all of our analysis too, we kind of heard a lot of feedback again and again and again for certain things. So for example, the issue of crowding and overcrowding in many of the spaces, or the issue of not having flexible enough use came up again and again as a theme. So some of those things that we heard multiple times, I would say was also, helped us prioritize the needs. But the sequencing, or if anybody else wants to add on.
thanks, Renee described it very well. The only thing I'd add is that we also looked at what got in the way of student learning. So some of the overcrowding that Renee referenced would get in the way, and then also even our ability to offer some of the technical training classes and having the right equipment and having the right facilities so students could really learn, as well as looking at how do we meet student demand in certain areas where we couldn't offer enough sessions for what students want to take just because we didn't have the right space or have the right equipment.
Anything else? Team, you guys all know this stuff better than anybody else.
Craig has a question.
Not quite.
Sorry.
So, you know, I took a look at the cost estimate, and one of the things I wanted to, and tried to avoid micromanaging at the same time. So let's just take this scenario where the sum total of this adds up to more than I can afford, or more than we can afford from a board perspective. You know, I look down the cost estimate, I see, you know, I'm just picking things, math classes, $1.8 million, English classes, $1.8 million, and I'm just making those numbers up, I don't know what they are. But if I have to cut back, how do we do that? I mean, you know, how do we get further underneath this? Do we remove scope? I'm just looking for, you know, how do we get to those questions to try to do that, understanding that these things are all designed to solve a problem. It means some problem doesn't get solved. But help us understand how we might think about that. Because I think it's unfair to say, take it or leave it, because I don't think that's what you're saying. But.
You could not renovate the math and English classrooms. I mean, that's something you could do. You could go through with a fine-tooth comb and look at specific facilities. You know, and I was here on back to school night, and that's not my recommendation, but that's something you could do. I was here on back to school night, and I was looking at every classroom I was in thinking, well, this one technically doesn't need new furniture. This one doesn't need new technology. So some of that might be going through some of those math and English classrooms and other classrooms and saying, okay, well, this one maybe could be put off until a later stage when there might be more funds because it's already had some investment recently, right? So there are those kinds of things that we would get to when you got down to the programming level for this. Beyond that, I mean, again, I'm not going to recommend taking out math and English classrooms. That's just the example you use. You know, we feel very strongly that all of these needs need to be addressed. And so there are some things that, you know, could theoretically be done independently later, that could be moved around from stage to stage. We're not encouraging that, but that is a possibility. I don't know, do P&W, you guys want to talk about any experiences you've had in this kind of thing, or would you rather not?
Hi, Mark Joliker, Perkins and Will. Couple of things to think about, Laura, as you conceive what this is. This is an overall, as a master plan, it's an overall strategy. It's about how you're taking facilities that have grown over time, strategically think about implementing improvements over time. That's the big picture. Next component, as you're pointing out, is around cost and how you wrestle with that. The end to that is how these sequences were developed, is with the master plan being the entire strategy, is we look at how you can implement groups of work logically so that the investment that you put in is always being used to highest and best. We never want to put money in that 5 years later you're taking out. It is not being strategic. This is how businesses look at their facilities. Universities do this, etc. So we look at these sequences, we're grouping. Then we look at the sequence, and you can very much look at any one of these and say there are components within the sequence that you can move to another sequence. You can dial it back to yet a sequence further down. So there are ways to move the cost on the scale. to a degree. The challenge are there are certain components in the sequence that need to happen in order for other improvements to be made. So for example, renovating the library cannot be upgraded unless you relocate the library before that takes place. So there's certain components that you have to make a choice on. You don't have to necessarily do all the renovation in any one of the sequences. Hopefully that helps.
I mean, classically, you've got two fundamental choices. One is reduce scope, and the other is to execute all the scope in a different manner than the estimate basis. I don't believe, I'd have to turn to Terry and Mark, I don't believe the basis for the cost estimate for this work is East Layton standards, is it?
No.
If you're familiar with what they got going on, yeah. This is kind of, well, you guys, I don't know what you're doing. What's the?
So, you know, we apply a cost per square foot for renovation based on light, moderate, heavy. P&W gives us direction. We apply those dollars per square foot based on historical data and cost of other schools that we've done. And we've worked in over 30 different school districts, and we've seen actual bids come in on many different projects, and so we understand the value and the cost, you know, based on our own experience. So I wouldn't say that this is at a very high end. It's not at a low end. It's sort of what would be standard for a high school of this level in this community.
Is that good park right there?
Yeah, I just wanted to have a bit of a conversation about it. I would say that from my perspective, I certainly wouldn't have the knowledge to decide that either the quality or the specific needs. But I also know that if we don't end up with an ability to fund it all, you know, it would be, the last thing I would want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a tremendous amount of good work here. We just might have to come back and challenge and say, well, you know, how do we do this? And we can extend it out over time, or we can choose not to do something.
That's part of the process? Okay. Jackie?
I'm sorry. To that point, and it was helpful to hear in terms of the sequencing, things that may be able to be moved to a different sequence, and I think perhaps removed, and I have no idea what that would be or what that would look like. But I don't want us to lose sight of Sarah's point either, that in terms of, you know, having something that is long-term, the aspects that are standalone and those that are dependent one to the other, that with the, you know, severe board change in 7 years could mean, you know, stop it, you're doing nothing more. So it would be helpful for me, and the things that my big takeaways right now are priorities about student need in the areas of health and safety, as well as, you know, accessibility and equity, and that across the board, whether it means classrooms or access to spaces that we currently don't provide enough access to. So is there a way for us to, you know, in this menu of things that each sequence has the listing of things, to start to think about, and you actually did it, Mike, with when you're talking about sequence one, you know, well, if we finish sequence one, you'd still have to do this piece in sequence two. If there a way to understand those things that may necessarily have to be tied together, that would help me in understanding if we go for aggressive timeline, should, you know, there be certain things that we have to make sure happen, you know, along the same lines versus the things that may be standalone in a sequence, if that makes sense.
Okay, I think we can get a little bit more crisp on that. And that does bring to mind one other thing that I neglected to mention. In all of this, there is some scope that's almost completely independent of other things that are going on. There are some very interdependent pieces of scope. Lynn mentioned you can't do sequence 2 until you, excuse me, 3 until you've done sequence 2. You really can't. It doesn't reflect our sense of priority that the performing arts is less important than physical education. It's the fact that you can't knock down that point, that part of the building, build the 2 floors for performing art, you leave physical education hanging. So, but there are elements that frankly have been kind of distributed. They're relatively minor elements, but they've been distributed to the sequences to kind of do some balancing of cost and activity. Most of it's classroom renovation that gets a little bit independent.
For November 15th, we can try to indicate which are the interdependent things and which things can be pulled out. I don't think you're going to find giant cost savings because they do tend to be some of the less expensive things. The big, building a new building is what costs a lot. But we will try to do that for November.
And my point with that
meeting.
is to keep, I guess, the focus of those overall goals of, the health and safety and accessibility. I don't want us to lose sight of, ADA issues, and, it is still striking to me that there are parts of the building, and it is because it's old, but if we're renovating, we have to be clear and conscious, just as we're having them removed for bathrooms, that we are being ADA compliant and having accessibility. Thank you.
I just wanted to echo Dr. Moore's comments that at the forefront, we have to keep equity in across the board. Health and life safety are critical. It could be cost efficient to not put in adequate lighting, but what does that do health-wise for students in the learning environment? We could say it's cost efficient not to upgrade the HVAC. What does that do for students who have allergies and asthma? So when we cut things, we really have to look critically through a lens of what is the impact going to be on the students that we serve. And if that means that at some point, as Craig indicated, we have to stretch it out. But I think we have to keep that at the forefront because that's what this institution is here for, to educate our students in the best and equitable environment that we possibly can.
Follow-up question. Now that I've seen the sheet with these numbers, I appreciate that itemization. There's still some really big numbers on here, and I'm wondering what will we be seeing in November or before then in terms of breaking down, like phys ed is 47 million in sequence 2. Clearly there's more than one item there. There's probably the biggie is the pool, the aquatic facility, and then for the next sequence, 20 million or so. I think that's the track. But the more that we can understand these numbers and then have some context of understanding what those numbers are in comparison to some of the things that were considered along the way, that would just help me and maybe others understand the choices that we're making here. And also perhaps, could those be some of the spots where if we had to reduce scope, what some of those options would be? So
you can do a more elemental breakdown of the cost.
The big elements, because obviously the English classrooms and other, that's not really where the big meat is in terms of the cost.
Right. That's not where the costs are. That's true.
Sorry for picking up the math.
Anything else? Jen, could you hand me that folder?
Really? No other questions? That's it? That's all you got? Man.
That's what happens when you prepare us well.
So you actually read all 95 or 100 pages?
Math. 91.
Yeah.
Except for math.
It's just the one document.
For the record, it's the shortest document. I just was overwhelmed with the 56 pages.
For the record.
I was debating whether to do this, Matt, but I'm going to.
Don't do it.
We'll say.
Okay. I'd just like to close with a couple observations. It's quite possible that some may say that the Imagine team is foolish enough to believe that new facilities will solve all of the school's problems. That's wrong on 2 accounts. One, we're not fools. More importantly, this won't solve all the complex issues that the school has to deal with. That said, it is also true that well thought out, well designed, well executed facilities have a profoundly positive impact on the students and faculty that will use them. That's not a hypothesis, that's not wishful thinking, that's a fact. It's also true that poor or marginal facilities, which the school has a lot of right now, have a disproportionately negative impact on students who, for whatever reason, are economically disadvantaged versus their peers. The reason's simple. The students who are economically advantaged have access to resources to remedy the limitations which the school's facilities sometimes impose, while others do not. So, while the recommendation of this master plan will not solve all the problems, they will move the needle substantially in the right direction, and they will take some important steps toward leveling the playing field. The Imagine team is proud to have developed this proposal, and we believe that these gains are more than enough to justify the investment we would be asking our communities to make. Thank you again very much for your time. We look forward to continuing to work with you toward the implementation of this. Thanks.